You may think the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was one of the most controversial moments in Formula One history, but let me tell you, it's got nothing on the subject we'll be exploring today. Let me take you back to the 2002 season in Formula One. Michael Schumacher was at his peak with Ferrari. Future world champions Jenson Button and Kimi Räikkönen were getting their first taste of life inside the pit lane, and all-time greats such as David Coulthard, Felipe Massa and Mark Webber were competing. But while they were fighting at the top, change was brewing, and one of the most significant moments of the 2002 season came at Benetton. The team where Schumacher won the first 2 of his 7 world titles was bought out by Renault as the French constructor made a return to Formula One after 17 years. The 2002 season would be the first year Renault were back on the grid, and soon they would go on to shape the modern history of Formula One. But it was the 2002 development driver that was catching the eye. After a season with European Minardi F1 and then the 2002 campaign as Renault's test driver, Fernando Alonso was promoted to the full-time seat in 2003 in the place of Button. 2 years later, he would be world champion, a feat he repeated the following year. But, as so often happened in Alonso's career, things took a turn for the worse. Renault were no longer as competitive as they once were, and following a brief switch to McLaren, Alonso was back at the French team for the 2008 season, in the hopes he could recapture his form of 2005 and 2006. But the 2008 season was the stuff of nightmares for Alonso. Having won at least 4 races in the past 3 campaigns, the Spaniard suddenly found himself in a dud of a car. Imagine a modern-day Williams with a boot full of concrete. And that's what Alonso's car must have felt like. He went through the first 14 races without a victory and did not even manage to land a spot on the podium in that time. Then came Singapore. The race in 2008 was the first time the Singapore Grand Prix had been added to the calendar in what was also the first night race to ever run in the sport. While Lewis Hamilton and Felipe Massa continued their gripping title fight, it was another miserable Saturday for Alonso. He qualified in 14th, just 1 spot above his teammate Nelson Piquet Jr., and it looked to be staying that way as the race got underway. Hamilton and Massa battled for the lead alongside Räikkönen, while Alonso managed to avoid a penalty despite cutting the first corner. As the leaders raced away, Alonso found himself stuck behind in the midfield pack, losing as much as 5 seconds per lap and watching his already small chances of a win become even smaller. With this in mind, he and Renault opted for a different strategy to the rest of the pack. In lap 12, he pitted for fresh tyres, as well as a top-up of fuel. Then, the controversy began. Alonso's teammate Piquet Jr. crashed heavily on the pit lane straight, smashing his car into the left wall and losing a wheel in the process. Renault's wildest dreams came true when suddenly the stewards announced that the pit lane was closed while they dealt with the incident. It spelt bad news for Nico Rosberg and Robert Kubica, who both needed to stop to refuel and were handed a penalty, but excellent news for Alonso, who was on the freshest tyres of anyone on the grid and crucially had enough fuel in his car. Suddenly, almost the entire grid was split between the haves and the have-nots. And what I mean by this is the drivers with fuel and the drivers without. The Red Bulls had been lucky, able to drive into the pits before the lane closed in order to refuel, but pretty much everyone else had not. Soon, almost every driver was in a desperate game of conserving enough fuel to keep their car going until the pit lane reopened, meaning Alonso had gone from no chance to leading the race. Finally, the pit lane opened and the drivers poured in, with some even queuing behind their teammates just to get their desperately needed fuel. There was further trouble for Massa after he managed to drive away with the fuel hose still attached, knocking a mechanic over as he left the garage, and was last by the time the team had managed to pull it off. But Alonso didn't care. He used all the experience of his 2 world championships to guide the Renault home, crossing the line 2.9 seconds ahead of Rosberg and earning his first win of the 2008 season. Now, If Renault or Alonso thought that was that, they massively miscalculated. Much like the conspiracy theories your weird mate from school used to tell you, rumors of Piquet Jr.'s crash being deliberate were dismissed early on. But FIA President Max Mosley described the claims as speculation. But the touch paper was well and truly lit when Piquet Jr. left the team in August of 2009. Renault dropped him after poor performances, but they had not been anticipating the shitstorm that would soon be heading their way. Later that month, a report from Piquet Jr.'s native Brazil said that the former Renault driver was ordered to crash, and as a result, the FIA immediately launched an investigation. It did not take long for them to produce a finding. Following statements by Piquet Jr. to the FIA, Renault was charged by the FIA for breaking Article 151C of the International Sporting Code. But soon after, the first of Piquet Jr.'s two statements to FIA was leaked, and it was revealed that he accused team principal Flavio Briatore and executive director of engineering Pat Symonds of ordering him to crash his car at a specific corner in order to produce the fuel madness that ensued. Things were only about to get messier. Renault launched legal proceedings against both Piquet Jr. and his father for alleged false allegations, and an attempt to blackmail the team in order to allow the driver to continue for the rest of the 2009 season. Fingers began pointing from all directions, with Symonds accusing Piquet Jr. of coming up with the plot and the driver accusing his former bosses. 2 days later, both Symonds and Briatore had been fired by Renault. The heat which Renault found themselves went up another notch when the World Motorsports Council meeting met for an extraordinary meeting to discuss the affair which had been dubbed Crashgate. Following a 90-minute hearing, the council threw the book at Renault. They were handed a disqualification sentence which was suspended for 2 years, meaning if a similar incident occurred before 2011, Renault would be banned from Formula 1. Briatore was banned indefinitely from any FIA-sanctioned event, while Symonds received a 5-year ban. To add insult to injury, Briatore was banned from managing drivers, and the FIA stated that super licenses would not be issued or renewed to any driver associated with him in the future. The whole affair rocked the world of Formula 1, as up until then the idea of fixing a race had been beyond comprehension. It would take years for Renault to salvage their destroyed reputation, and that was something Briatore never managed. As the dust settled and the world of Formula 1 kept on spinning, teams were given a stark warning of not to do anything similar in the future, and thankfully for the sake of the sport, no similar incident has occurred since then. The one man that walked away without punishment? Alonso. The Spaniard maintained his innocence, stating he was never aware of such a plot, and the FIA believed him. He would go on to win the following race in Japan before ending the season in 5th place. But let me take you back to that moment on the Singapore podium. A jubilant Alonso with a champagne bottle in hand leans into the TV microphone and says, "This will be a historic race for Formula 1. How right you were, Fernando.